Today I'm pleased to say that missing backpacker Carolina Wilga was located safe and well yesterday evening after an extensive search.
In today's documentary, we take you deep into the incredible true story of Carolina Wilga, a young German backpacker who vanished in the remote Australian outback and reappeared 12 days later in a survival story that stunned the world. But the most unforgettable moment came on day 12, when she was finally found by a passing stranger. What Carolina said in that moment left a lasting impact on everyone who heard it. If you're new to the channel, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We love giving a shout out to one of our amazing viewers in every video. Today's shout out goes to Marianne Anthony, tuning in all the way from Ireland. Thank you, Marianne, for your continued support as we work to bring you the most compelling and current missing persons cases from around the world. Carolina Wilga came to Australia chasing vast skies and wild freedom. She vanished chasing help. For 12 days, Carolina Wilga was alone in the bushland. No map, no signal, no one coming. What happened between the last petrol stop and the moment she stumbled barefoot into the arms of a stranger remains a puzzle of survival, instinct, and eerie silence. This is not just a story of getting lost. This is the story of being forgotten by the land. Carolina Wilga was just another traveler before the headlines, before the search teams, and before her name stirred the national press. However, she was not someone who chased Instagram clout or sought cheap thrills. At 26, she'd already been on the road for over 2 years, living with intention, collecting stories, not souvenirs. A native of Dresden, Germany, Carolina was a woman who defied categorization. Friends called her a nomad, but that felt too light. She was an iron-willed adventurer, the kind who journaled in shorthand and carried a field knife next to her notebooks. She'd arrived in Australia in 2023 with a working visa, a second-hand camera, and enough gear to build a life out of the back of a van. Not just anywhere, Australia. The land that doesn't forgive. The land never forgets who you are. Her vehicle of choice, a 1990s Mitsubishi Delica, affectionately nicknamed Wally. The van was modified for off-grid travel. Solar panels on the roof, extra water tanks, and a modest kitchenette. To many it looked like an aging rust bucket. To Carolina, it was armor and sanctuary in equal measure. She worked odd jobs to fund her freedom, mostly at mining camps across Western Australia. Although the shifts were grueling and the conditions brutal, they paid well and allowed her to drift between remote towns for weeks at a time, camping beneath ancient eucalyptus trees and photographing wild skies. To those who knew her, Carolina radiated self-sufficiency. She had a wilderness certificate from Germany, could navigate by compass, and had once solo trekked across a fjord in Norway. She was not reckless. She was calculating. But even the best prepared wanderers can misjudge the landscape, or their limits. The last confirmed images of Carolina Wilga are deceptively mundane. At 10:46 a.m. on June 29, 2025, CCTV captured her entering the general store in Beacon, a quiet town 280 kilometers northeast of Perth. She was dressed plainly, cargo pants, weather-worn hiking boots, and a gray cap pulled low. She purchased canned food, bottled water, and extra batteries. Nothing out of the ordinary. Staff recall she was polite, soft-spoken, and seemed in a hurry. Her accent was distinct, but her movements were efficient, almost rehearsed. By 2:10 p.m., Carolina's van was spotted on CCTV again, this time at a petrol station in Tooje. This would be the last time anyone would see her in a stable, safe setting. Later that day, Carolina sent a brief voice note to a friend back in Germany. Her tone was weary. Driving all day. Long dirt roads. No signal for hours. Will rest soon. The land is so big, feels like it's swallowing me. She followed it with a short text. Need to reach Kalani soon. Running low on fuel. I'm exhausted. That message would be her final outgoing communication. What happened after Tooje remains partially speculative, but reconstructed through GPS pings, tire tracks, and terrain familiarity. Authorities believe Carolina attempted to take a remote back route toward Karroun Hill Nature Reserve, possibly to camp overnight. This area, while technically accessible by vehicle, is treacherous after rainfall. Red earth turns to thick, clinging mud. GPS is unreliable, and signage is scarce. Why she would detour through such a region remains unclear. Perhaps she was seeking solitude. Maybe she misjudged the time needed before sundown. Or possibly she took a wrong turn and decided to press on, believing she could power through. What is known is this: her van was later found bogged in the mud, roughly 36 kilometers off any maintained road. This was not a mild detour. This was isolation in the purest sense. Beyond reception, beyond casual discovery, beyond most satellite navigation routes. Inside the van, investigators would later find items that told a quiet, haunting story. Uneaten food, a partially filled water jug, and an unfolded paper map with a red circle around Karroun Hill. The driver's side door was left ajar. There was no blood. No sign of foul play. Just a pair of footprints, veering into dense bushland. To understand how a young woman with extensive outdoor experience could end up lost in one of the most dangerous landscapes on Earth, one must first understand what Karroun Hill is. This isn't the picturesque outback portrayed in tourist brochures. This is dense mallee scrub, punctuated by jagged granite outcrops, and choked with wattle and spine effects. The ground is rocky, the nights are near freezing, and the paths, if any, are used chiefly by kangaroos and feral camels. Carolina's choice to leave the van marks a critical turning point. Experts say it's the cardinal rule of desert survival: never leave your vehicle. A stationary van is far easier to spot from the air than a human being. But Carolina, concussed, disoriented, and likely panicking, chose to go. And with that decision, she stepped off the grid and into myth. In the days following her eventual rescue, global media would paint Carolina as either a hero or a fool, either an inspiring adventurer or another careless tourist who underestimated the bush. But both of these depictions are incomplete. To her sister, Leah, Carolina was neither naive nor arrogant. She planned everything. Always. Even as a child, she was meticulous. But she also trusted herself too much sometimes. She believed she could outlast anything. To former co-workers at a mining site near Mount Magnet, she was known as the girl with the 1,000-yard stare. Not in a haunted sense, but in the way she could fix her gaze on the horizon and speak about dreams that stretched beyond the confines of towns, states, or continents. She once said, "I want to feel what it's like to vanish without vanishing," a colleague recalled. In hindsight, that quote feels prophetic, eerie even, as if Carolina sensed that the land might one day test her mettle in the cruelest possible way. It would be nearly 2 weeks before anyone stumbled across Carolina's van. But during those phantom days, between June 29th and July 11th, she existed in a liminal space. Not dead. Not yet rescued. Just surviving. Rescue officials later confirmed that the van's tires had dug deep into the mud. She had used Maxtrax and wood to attempt recovery, evident from markings in the soil. But alone and possibly injured, she lacked the strength or angle to lift the vehicle out. The temperature that night dropped to 1.8 degrees Celsius. Her sleeping bag was left inside the van, which means she likely departed with minimal warmth, possibly only a light jacket and a small backpack. Why she didn't return to the van is another mystery. Perhaps she got turned around in the brush. Perhaps her head injury impaired her memory or orientation. Maybe she kept walking because something primal told her, "If I stop, I die." As the sun set on June 29th, the story of Carolina Wilga was no longer that of a traveler. It became the story of an outlier. A woman unmoored from time, chasing survival in a place that swallows even the strongest. She had entered the wilderness as a prepared nomad. She would now have to endure it as prey. The Outback does not make announcements. It does not scream for help. It waits. And for 12 agonizing days, Carolina Wilga walked through its silence. It began with a mistake. A single wheel spin. A decision made on fading sunlight and quiet confidence. When the van sank, the world went still. No service. No signposts. No second chances. For Carolina Wilga, that moment wasn't just a breakdown. It was a descent into a silence that few survive. When Carolina Wilga turned off the main road, the world around her began to narrow, physically and metaphorically. The track she followed cut through Karroun Hill Nature Reserve like a faint scar. Overgrown, rarely used, and largely absent from navigation systems. She likely expected to find a quiet campsite or a backtrack toward Kalani. But what she found instead was trouble layered in dust and deception. The ground looked firm, but recent rain had transformed the red soil into a deceptive trap. Malleable, slick, and eager to swallow weight. Her Mitsubishi Delica, a capable vehicle by most standards, slowed, then staggered, then lurched to a halt. 2 wheels were deep in the mud. The bush stood in eerie silence. Carolina got out and circled her van. She was still calm. Experienced. This wasn't her first bog. She'd carried recovery gear, Maxtrax traction boards, wood planks, even a small shovel. She would try everything. But the land had other ideas. Survival experts would later point to this moment as a defining failure, not of skill but of nature's advantage. Karroun Hill is deceptive. The surface crust can appear dry while the underlayer is a soft, sticky morass. Carolina's gear worked against the terrain, not with it. Each attempt at traction just dug the wheels deeper. Inside the van, she had food, water, and shelter. The logical move would have been to stay. Wait, conserve. But something happened that altered her logic. Authorities believe the moment of impact may have jolted her against the steering wheel or the roof interior. When the van was later examined, a small smear of blood was found on the driver's side visor and along the rear window. It wasn't a wound that would have killed, but it may have been enough to confuse. Even a mild concussion can produce disorientation, memory lapses, mood swings, and an overwhelming urge to flee. At some point, perhaps hours later, Carolina made a choice. She took her pack, left the van unlocked, and stepped into the bush. It would be the last time she saw it. Why did Carolina leave? Theories abound. Theory 1, she was panicking. Disoriented from the crash, she may have believed she was close to a road or town, just a few kilometers away. In the outback, this belief is often fatal. Terrain distorts distance. A ridge that appears just over there can be 5 kilometers away. You walk toward hope and hope dissolves. Theory 2, she feared someone might come after her. Some survival psychologists suggest that disorientation sometimes triggers paranoia. Even experienced travelers can become convinced they're being watched, followed, or hunted, especially when injured and isolated. Carolina had no known enemies, but fear doesn't need facts to take hold. Theory 3, she believed movement equaled survival. She may have thought that walking would bring her back to civilization faster than waiting for an unlikely rescue in a dead zone. But without a compass, clear track, or satellite signal, movement became its trap. Whatever her reasoning, she left everything behind: food, warmth, and protection. All she carried was a small pack containing a water bottle, flashlight, lightweight blanket, and a laminated map she'd folded several times over. No hyperb, no flares, no way to say, "I'm here." The van waited for her, but she never returned. Karroun Hill Nature Reserve is not a tourist spot. There are no curated trails, no ranger stations, and no cell phone coverage. Just endless scrub, walls of wattle and acacia that grow shoulder-high and blot out the sky. Daytime temperatures can climb above 24 degrees Celsius, but at night, the cold sinks like a knife. It is a dry country, but after recent storms, the ground was slick, the vegetation saturated. Carolina wandered through this, injured, alone, likely dehydrated by the first night. Search teams later retraced her likely path using boot impressions and broken vegetation. The route zigzagged chaotically. No straight lines. No sense of compass. Just someone moving, slowly, aimlessly, through brush that scratched her skin and left seeds in her socks. And still she walked. The most brutal truth to accept in Carolina's survival is the invisible injury, the blow to the head that shifted her behavior from strategic to erratic. Medical experts later concluded that Carolina suffered a mild traumatic brain injury in the van incident. Symptoms may have included disorientation, memory lapses, nausea, difficulty processing direction, paranoia. One rescuer who later debriefed with hospital staff reported that Carolina, once found, struggled to recall how many days had passed. She couldn't identify which direction she had come from. She repeated herself, and at times she asked whether she had been dreaming. This fog of confusion may explain why she walked in loops, why she didn't return to the van, and why she chose increasingly remote directions. It wasn't recklessness, it was survival skewed by damage. In effect, Carolina was no longer fully herself. Her mind was waging its battle, even before thirst or hunger set in. Imagine this. The sun sets behind the thorny bush. The air drops by 15 degrees in less than 2 hours. There are no lights, no firewood, no fire. Only distant animal sounds and a sky so large it feels like judgment. Carolina, alone, must have curled into a shallow depression, using her pack as a pillow, the blanket wrapped around her against the cold wind. Mosquitoes find her quickly. Dingoes roam not far off. She doesn't sleep. This would be the first of 12 nights spent outside. Each one is a slow-burning assault on her body and mind. The cold gnaws at joints. The hunger dulls the senses. The fear, ever present, starts to mutate into something else, resignation. But Carolina did not stop. Not yet. Search and rescue teams say the silence of the bush is the most dangerous part. It tells you nothing. No cues. No, go here. No, try again. Only rustling leaves, the buzzing of insects, and your footsteps, until you start imagining others. For Carolina, the silence became a mirror. It reflected her choices, her pain, and her resolve. She began following animal trails, possibly looking for water. She drank from puddles, from depressions filled by storm runoff. She filtered nothing. By day 3, her water reserves were running dangerously low. Her lips were cracked. Her feet, still in boots, were blistered and bruised. The van, even if she remembered the direction, was no longer a reality. She had moved too far. And still she walked. There's a myth that the Australian outback kills only the unprepared. But the truth is crueler. It can kill anyone, prepared or not, because it doesn't negotiate. No 2 square kilometers look the same. GPS signals bounce off granite outcrops. Water is rare. The scrub is too dense for visibility but too sparse for shelter. Carolina had no compass, no sense of scale. She was surviving moment to moment, choosing shelter over direction. She found a small cave on day 4, slept inside, curled like an animal, her skin covered in mosquito bites, her hair tangled with bark and grass. The next morning she walked again. Back at the bogged van, nothing moved. Dingoes circled once, then lost interest. A hawk perched on the roof rack. Inside, cans of food sat untouched. If Carolina had stayed, she might have been rescued sooner. But the land gave her a cruel calculus. Risk starvation inside safety or risk rescue through exposure. She had chosen the latter. And the van, a symbol of modern life, of order, became a grave marker waiting to be claimed. By day 5, Carolina had lost track of time. Her body was beginning to break down, joints inflamed, skin blistered, cognitive clarity fading. But her will remained. Even as the wilderness stripped her of tools, direction, and identity, she did not stop moving. In the coming days, she would find the limits of human endurance and walk right past them. She had no food, no map. There was no way of knowing if help was coming. And still she walked. Through bushland that devours sound, under skies that held no mercy, Carolina Wilga kept moving. Each hour was an act of defiance. Each step represented a quiet refusal to die. By the 4th day, Carolina was no longer a traveler. She was a survivalist operating on instinct. Her body had begun to deteriorate. Muscle fatigue, severe dehydration, and exposure to sub-zero nighttime temperatures. Yet she was still mobile. Every morning she would rise, stretch her limbs, and set a direction, any direction, and begin again. She had no compass, no navigational aid, and no consistent landmarks. The horizon was blurred with bushes. Trees looked identical. Days passed without meaning. Nights crept in cold and cruel. To stay alive, Carolina relied on primitive cues. Water-smooth rock formations meant runoff. Ant trails might lead to water. Mosquitoes often hover near moisture. She listened, watched, learned. And when she found water, dirty, shallow, often green-tinted, she drank it. There was no choice. Psychologists who studied Carolina's case would later argue that her most significant challenge wasn't physical, it was psychological. Prolonged isolation in harsh environments triggers what survival experts call wilderness psychosis. Hallucinations, disordered time perception, a blurring of memories and moments. By the 5th or 6th night, Carolina was likely slipping between awareness and delirium. She spoke to birds. She sang to the wind. Her journal, recovered from her bag, contained cryptic notes and half-finished thoughts. Sky is too big. Follow the shadow. Caves breathe. Stay in the warm ones. You are not alone. Not yet. These entries were not clear. They were not planned. These symptoms represented a brain-conserving reality, similar to that of a dying battery. Carolina slept wherever the land allowed it. Under shallow overhangs. Between dry creek beds. In one case, investigators believe she crawled into a hollow tree trunk to escape the cold. She was not sheltered. She had no fire. Her blanket, though lightweight, was soaked from condensation and offered little warmth. Each night, temperatures dropped to near freezing. On the worst nights, the bushland around Karroun Hill dropped to 0.9 degrees Celsius. Wind would knife through thin fabric. Mosquitoes, undeterred by cold, swarmed her exposed hands and face. She did not sleep. She passed out. Her body shut down in short cycles, waking her to the sound of rustling brush or her chattering teeth. When she awoke, she always kept walking. At some point, rescuers believe around day 7, Carolina lost her boots. Whether they fell apart, became waterlogged, or were simply discarded due to swelling and blisters, no one knows. But she was found barefoot. Walking barefoot in the outback is an agony difficult to describe. The earth is not soft. It is gravel, rock, splinters, and ant nests. The soles of her feet were later described as shredded, burned, and torn. But she walked anyway. Perhaps it was a habit. Maybe she had entered a trance state. Survival instincts can override pain, briefly. But the cumulative trauma of 12 days on open ground was transforming her into a living husk. Photos taken after her rescue show a woman who looked nothing like her former self. Gaunt, bug-bitten, bruised, and with hair matted with bark and grit. She had lost weight. Her legs were swollen. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper. And yet she remembered her name. Carolina's trail, reconstructed through partial footprints and disturbed terrain, showed signs of close brushes with wildlife. On one night, she likely took shelter in a shallow depression behind an outcrop. Tracks discovered later showed a dingo had circled the area, sniffed, then wandered off. Carolina never mentioned the encounter. She may have been too exhausted to notice, or too far gone to care. She also encountered a wild camel herd, estimated at 40 to 60 animals, moving east through the region. Witnesses claim that Carolina mentioned giant shadows in the morning light when debriefed by doctors. The camels may have saved her life. Herds are known to dig for water, unintentionally exposing pools beneath the sand. It's believed she followed their trail for at least one day, drinking from hoof prints filled with rainwater. Carolina never knew what day it was. By day 9, her sense of time collapsed entirely. According to survival specialists, this is the brain's way of protecting itself from despair. When you don't know how long you've been suffering, there is no pressure to stop. You simply keep moving. Carolina mainly walked in the mornings. By late afternoon, she would look for shelter and stop moving. She avoided open ground, whether instinctively or consciously is unclear. She marked no trees, left no symbols. She did not build signals. Some believe this was due to mental confusion. Others say she had given up on rescue. But one thing is clear, she never gave up on walking. Day 10. The bush had reduced Carolina to the brink. Her body had begun to shut down key systems. Fat reserves depleted, mental clarity fading. Organs strained from dehydration and extreme exertion. Rescuers believe she only walked 5 to 6 kilometers per day by this point, slow, shuffling distances. Her path was erratic. She moved in zigzags, retracing steps, pausing for hours under shaded trees. She was sunburned beyond recognition. Her skin, exposed during long walks without protection, was flaking, blistered, and raw. Her lips were split. Her eyelids are swollen. Her voice, hoarse and dry, may have been unused for days. She had stopped talking to herself. And then, on the 12th day, something changed. A dirt road emerged from the brush. Maruba Road. Remote, dusty, rarely traveled. But real. Carolina must have seen it from a ridge or by sheer accident. She stumbled onto it, barefoot, thin and slow-moving. The road stretched out before her like a mirage. She kept walking. At approximately 4:15 p.m. on July 11, 2025, a vehicle appeared on the horizon. It was a white Land Cruiser, driven by local farmer Tanya Henley, on her way back from checking cattle fences. Henley slowed immediately. What she saw would haunt her for years. A young woman, pale and brittle, walking with deliberate fragility along the roadside. Her arms were scratched. Her expression was vacant. Carolina looked up, raised one arm, and whispered, "Help." Henley jumped out of the car and ran to her. Without hesitation, she wrapped her in a hug. Carolina's words were barely audible. "You're my guardian angel." Emergency services were promptly notified. Within an hour, a rescue chopper lifted Carolina from the dirt road and flew her to Fiona Stanley Hospital in Perth. Doctors described her condition as severely dehydrated, undernourished, and psychologically traumatized. She had lost nearly 12% of her body weight. Her internal organs were stressed but functioning. She had bruises on her ribs, swelling in her legs, and more than 200 mosquito bites across her body. Yet somehow she was alive. In her first coherent words to hospital staff, Carolina asked for water and then said, "Did I make it all the way?" Carolina Wilga walked more than 40 kilometers through one of the harshest landscapes in the world. Alone, injured, starving, confused. She survived what most would not. But survival is not the end of the story. Because when she finally re-entered the world, there were questions. And Carolina had only fragments of answers. There are stories about people who disappear, fewer still about those who return. On the 12th day, Carolina Wilga didn't collapse. She walked out of a silent war and into the arms of a stranger. This event is the moment a nation held its breath, and a ghost came back alive. July 11, 2025. Maruba Road, a remote stretch of red earth, cuts through the sparsely populated inland corridor of Western Australia. It was approximately 4:15 p.m. when local farmer Tanya Henley turned onto the dusty road after checking boundary fencing on her family's cattle property. Her routine was predictable. The terrain was familiar. She knew every bend, every rise, every dry bush that had sat unchanged for years. But that afternoon something was wrong. On the straightaway ahead she saw movement. Not wildlife. There was no sign of a vehicle. A lone figure was present, barefoot, walking. As she slowed the Land Cruiser, her instincts kicked in. She'd lived out here long enough to know what people don't do. They don't walk alone in the bush without gear. They don't move like that, slow, swaying, half floating in the heat shimmer. She rolled down her window. "Are you okay?" No answer. There was only a blank stare. Then the woman raised one hand. It trembled, and she whispered a single word: "Help." Tanya Henley stepped out of her vehicle without hesitation. The woman before her was clearly in distress, her face swollen with insect bites, eyes glassy, and hair tangled with bark and grit. Her clothes were ripped and caked in mud and blood. Her bare feet were cracked and bleeding. Still she stood. Henley approached slowly, arms open. She offered a gentle hug, careful not to startle the woman or knock her over. The reply was faint but unforgettable. "You're my guardian angel." Henley knew immediately who she was looking at. The local news had been talking about a missing German backpacker for over a week. Flyers had circulated. Search crews had been scouring the Karroun Hill area to no avail. No sightings. No clues. All that was visible was a van. And silence. And now, against all odds, Carolina Wilga was standing in front of her. Henley drove Carolina immediately to the nearest area with mobile reception, approximately 20 minutes away. Once she had a signal, she contacted emergency services and gave them her location. The dispatcher was stunned. Carolina had been listed as missing for nearly 2 weeks. Her family, desperate and thousands of kilometers away, had feared the worst. Henley gave her water and a blanket. She spoke gently. Carolina didn't say much, but her eyes stayed wide open. She seemed alert but dazed, unsure if this was real. Police units were dispatched from nearby towns. An emergency airlift was coordinated from Perth. By the time the rescue helicopter arrived, Carolina's vitals were stable, but her body was beginning to crash from exertion. Video footage shows the moment Carolina was lifted into the rescue chopper, strapped to a stretcher, eyes half closed, hand loosely gripping the rail. To many watching later, she looked unconscious. But the pilot later recalled that she whispered a single phrase as the blades began to lift. "I made it, didn't I?" The flight lasted less than 90 minutes. In that time, the world changed. News alerts broke across Australian media. Missing backpacker found alive after 12 days in Outback. German woman defies odds, survives alone in bushland. Miracle in the Mallee. By the time the helicopter touched down at Fiona Stanley Hospital in Perth, reporters were already assembling outside the emergency ward. Inside, doctors and trauma specialists were waiting. Doctors described Carolina's condition as fragile but stable. Her list of injuries told a brutal story. Severe dehydration. She had been operating on minimal fluid intake, likely sourced from puddles and rainwater. Sun exposure damage. Her skin was blistered and peeling from constant exposure. Muscle degradation. Her body had begun to break down its tissue for energy. Infection risk arose from dozens of open mosquito bites and foot lacerations, which presented significant threats. She shed about 9 kilograms, 19.8 pounds, of weight in less than 2 weeks. Concussion symptoms, confusion, memory gaps, and light sensitivity. But the most striking injury was invisible. Doctors noted symptoms consistent with acute stress reaction (ASR). The body's response to extreme trauma. Carolina flinched at sudden noises. She spoke little. She often stared out the window as if searching for brushland beyond the glass. Yet despite all this, she was alive entirely by her own will. Carolina's family, watching helplessly from Germany, received the call they'd been waiting for at 1:04 a.m. German time. A liaison from the German consulate had called personally. "She's alive. She's safe. She's recovering." Her sister, Leah Wilga, broke down in tears during a live radio interview later that week. "We had prepared for the worst. I never imagined I'd hear her voice again. I just want to hold her." The family arranged to fly to Perth immediately. Due to Carolina's fragile state, visitation was delayed for 48 hours. During that time, she remained in a trauma unit, monitored around the clock. Doctors encouraged sleep, fluids, and limited conversation. Carolina complied. But she kept asking the same question. Is the van okay? As news of Carolina's survival spread, the media frenzy intensified. Social media platforms flooded with hashtags. Hashtag Carolina Wilga. Hashtag Bush Survivor. Hashtag 12-Day Miracle. Survival experts, former SES officers, and wilderness psychologists took to television and podcasts to analyze how she made it. Incredible resilience. She should have died out there. A triumph of willpower over environment. The Western Australia Police issued a statement praising both the search crews and the vigilance of locals like Henley. It was the right person at the right moment that saved Carolina's life. But make no mistake, her survival was the result of extraordinary personal endurance. WA Premier Roger Cook held a press briefing that afternoon. This outcome is rare. This land can be deadly. Carolina Wilga's story serves as a valuable lesson for everyone, emphasizing the importance of preparation, resilience, and the delicate balance between adventure and tragedy. On July 14, 2025, Carolina released a short statement from her hospital bed. Typed by her hand, it read, "I want to thank every person who searched for me, the WA police, the volunteers. I was unaware of the presence of the helicopters. I am particularly grateful to Tanya, my guardian angel, who halted her vehicle and saved my life. I am recovering slowly and remembering more each day. Thank you for giving me time." The message resonated deeply with me. It was simple, honest, human, and it reminded people that the story was not just a headline. Carolina Wilga had been on the verge of being added to a list of the lost, but she refused to become a cautionary tale. Tanya Henley gave a short, emotional interview days after the rescue. She did not want fame. She did not consider herself a hero. "I did what anyone out here would have done. We look out for each other. I just happened to be on that road that day." But when asked how she felt, she paused, then said, "It was like finding a ghost that hadn't realized it was alive yet." She was so quiet. But her eyes, they were still fighting. Carolina Wilga walked out of the wild on instinct. She survived by a thread woven from courage, confusion, and whatever strength lives deep inside those who simply refuse to quit. But as she lay in a hospital bed recovering, a bigger question loomed, not how she survived, but why she did when so many others didn't. The air inside Fiona Stanley Hospital was sterile and still, broken only by the soft beeping of machines and the whisper of footsteps down sterile white corridors. But behind one particular curtain on the third floor, a wave of quiet emotion stirred. Carolina Wilga, barefoot, bruised, skeletal but breathing, had finally made it out of the wild. Her eyes, though sunken from dehydration and exhaustion, told a different story now. They carried a flicker of clarity, a spark, the look of someone who had touched the edge of something unknowable and survived. It had been 4 days since she was found, dazed and fragile, wandering down a remote Western Australian road, and now the world wanted to hear what she remembered. But her silence at first said more than any words ever could. In the days immediately following her rescue, Carolina said very little. Doctors at Fiona Stanley described her condition as stable but mentally fragile. Nurses rotated in and out, checking vitals, changing 4 bags, whispering in low tones outside her room. When she did speak, it was slow and tentative, like each word had to claw its way through the static that still hung around her thoughts. She was in shock. Deep shock, said Dr. Amelia Fraser, the trauma psychologist brought in to work with Carolina. Physically, she was healing faster than expected, but psychologically, she was still in the bush. It wasn't just her body that needed to recover. It was the story, the experience, the isolation, the days and nights that blurred together beneath trees and rain and silence. And the voice inside her head, relentless, growing quieter only when she walked, when she moved, when she kept going. She kept asking what day it was, said one nurse. Then she'd ask what month it was. There was a lot she couldn't remember. But on July 14th, 3 days after her rescue, Carolina broke her silence with a written message, issued through the hospital with assistance from police liaison officers and the German consulate. It read in part, "I want to thank the people of Western Australia, from the bottom of my heart. I'm grateful to every single person who helped search for me. To WA police, to the volunteers, to the helicopters, and to the local communities that came together. And to the woman who stopped when she saw me walking, Tanya, you are my guardian angel." The media seized on that final phrase, guardian angel. It became the emotional headline of the day. A story of a young woman alone in the wilderness, nearly lost to time, only to be found by a stranger in a dusty 4WD. But it wasn't just a neat survival tale. It was a lesson. And in the days that followed, as Carolina slowly began to engage with the world again, it became clear she understood the gravity of what had happened. Across Australia, and indeed back home in Germany, public fascination turned to admiration. Hashtags like #Carolina Wilga and #Outback Survivor trended globally. News anchors framed it as a miracle. Survival experts called it a statistical outlier. Bush trackers interviewed by local TV said they were shocked she lasted as long as she did without fire, gear, or a beacon. She shouldn't be alive, said Jeff Hargrave, a retired SES leader interviewed by ABC Perth. You get lost out there with no comms, no clear bearings, and your chances go down by the hour. The public marveled at her resilience, but they also scrutinized her decision-making. Forums buzzed with questions. Why did she leave the vehicle? Why wasn't she carrying an emergency beacon? Why didn't she wait for help? But those closest to Carolina, and those who knew the bush, pushed back on the criticism. People don't understand what panic does to the human brain, Dr. Fraser said in an interview. You're alone, confused, and injured. Your logical faculties are eroded by dehydration and trauma. Decision-making becomes reactive, not rational. And Carolina's decision to leave the van, however risky, was ultimately what brought her to Maroubra Road. It led her miraculously to life. Back in Hamburg, the news of Carolina's rescue triggered an emotional wave. Friends described the mood as disbelief mixed with relief. A candlelight vigil that had been quietly planned by family members transformed overnight into a celebration of hope. Her mother, Anna Wilga, spoke to the German press just hours after the first hospital photo was released. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "We were preparing to grieve. We had lost her once before years ago to her wanderlust, but this was different. I don't think I've ever prayed so hard. And now, she's alive." The family's first video call with Carolina was reportedly brief but emotional. Her father couldn't speak. Her sister sobbed. Carolina smiled weakly, and the hospital interpreter gently reminded her to breathe deeply. "Tell Oma I'm okay," she said. For a woman who had gone 12 days without another human voice, even a brief video call felt surreal. News agencies flooded the hospital's media office with interview requests. Offers came in from 60 Minutes, Der Spiegel, and even Netflix, with interest in turning the story into a limited documentary series. But Carolina declined all media appearances at the time. She wasn't ready, her liaison officer later explained. She asked us to share her gratitude but said she needed time. Her mind was still in the bush. In the absence of a formal interview, her written reflections became the primary source of insight. In one such letter, later released with her permission, she wrote, "There were moments I thought I would die out there. The cold at night was like knives. The mosquitoes felt like they had teeth. I drank from puddles, from leaves. My feet were bleeding. But I kept thinking, just keep walking. Just one more step. Just one more." Much of the public attention also turned to Tanya Henley, the farmer who spotted Carolina on Maroubra Road. In her first televised interview, Henley appeared on ABC's The 7.30 Report, recounting the moment she saw Carolina through the windshield. "She looked like a ghost," Tanya said. "Just skin and bones, walking with this limp, sunburnt face and tangled hair. I didn't know if she was real at first. But then she waved." What happened next has since become part of local folklore. She came up to the car and said, "You're my guardian angel." I'll never forget that. The two women hugged, and Henley gave her water, food, and blankets before radioing for help. Emergency responders arrived soon after, stunned to find that the woman missing for nearly 2 weeks was not only alive, but lucid. "I didn't rescue her," Henley said humbly. "She rescued herself. I just got to be the one at the end of the road." Following the initial wave of media interest, survival experts began dissecting Carolina's journey in professional forums and bushcraft communities. WA Search and Rescue released a report highlighting her survival strategies, however rudimentary, as improvised but effective under extreme mental strain. They listed drinking rainwater and puddle runoff, seeking shelter in shaded or protected areas, walking only during daylight, attempting to navigate south using sun orientation. But the most enormous red flag, she left her vehicle. Unless you are 100% confident in your bearings and have access to supplies, stay with your vehicle, the report warned. A stationary target is always easier to find than a moving one. In a later reflection, Carolina acknowledged this mistake. "I thought I could find a road faster if I walked. But I had no compass, no beacon. It was foolish. I was lucky. Western Australia Premier Roger Cook held a press briefing shortly after Carolina's message went public. Flanked by WA police and emergency services, he praised her resilience but used the moment to educate. "We are relieved Ms. Wilga was found alive. But let this be a reminder, the Outback is beautiful, but it is also unforgiving. Always carry an APERB, have a route plan, and alert someone before entering remote terrain." He later announced a $3 million expansion to WA's remote emergency education programs, including partnerships with hostels and backpacker hubs to distribute survival guides to foreign visitors. In the weeks that followed, Carolina began her long process of healing, not just physically but emotionally. She underwent therapy for survivor's guilt, acute stress response, and mild post-traumatic amnesia. Doctors noted that she occasionally experienced phantom sounds, like the rustling of branches or footsteps behind her, even while indoors. "I had to remind her she was safe," said Dr. Fraser. She would look out the window and ask if it was going to rain, like the weather still decided her fate. But slowly something shifted. One day, a nurse found Carolina sketching something in her recovery journal, a rough map of the bush with winding lines and minor X marks where she had slept. It wasn't entirely accurate, but it was detailed, personal. "I like her way of retelling the story without having to relive it aloud." It was her version of closure, the nurse said. By late July 2025, Carolina had been discharged from the hospital. She declined to hold a press conference but released one final message through her liaison. "I don't consider myself a hero. I made mistakes and I survived by luck as much as will. But I hope someone hears my story and remembers to prepare better. I hope someone else's story ends because they carried a beacon, or waited at the van, or asked for help sooner." Carolina returned quietly to her family in Hamburg for what would become an extended sabbatical from solo travel. In a private interview shared later by a friend, she said she was still figuring out what came next. "I still love the world. I still love nature. But I have more respect now. For the land. For the silence. And for time." The midwinter skies over Western Australia had barely begun to clear when conversations about Carolina Wilga's ordeal shifted from relief to reflection. Her miraculous survival, after nearly 2 weeks lost and injured in the Outback, wasn't just a story of resilience. It was a warning, clear and chilling, for travelers, adventurers, and those who assumed modern convenience could outpace ancient terrain. In the days following her rescue, Carolina remained at Fiona Stanley Hospital in Perth, recovering physically and emotionally. Though her official statement was brief and gracious, thanking local authorities, search volunteers, the German consulate, and the woman who found her, those few lines rippled across the global media landscape. Australia watched, but so did Germany. So did backpackers and hostels from Alice Springs to Berlin. Her story was discussed in bushwalking forums, travel Facebook groups, Reddit threads, and survival podcasts. Even non-adventurers found themselves wondering, could I have survived that? Would I have made the same choices? What emerged from the emotional aftermath was something more valuable than headlines: clarity, a reckoning with the risks, and a collective sense that something needed to be learned. The first and perhaps most universal takeaway from Carolina's story came from both law enforcement and bush survival experts. Do not leave your vehicle if stranded in remote terrain, unless there is immediate danger. Inspector Tony Valletta of the Western Australia Police was blunt in his post-incident statement. Had Carolina stayed with her van, our ground crews or air patrol may have located her days earlier. The area she wandered through has low visibility. Once she left the vehicle, she left our only point of reference. The Mitsubishi Delica was eventually found, bogged deep in Karroun Hill Nature Reserve, exactly where she had become stuck. Rescuers later admitted that search teams had likely passed within kilometers of her position multiple times, but had no visual markers without the van as a fixed target. Abandoning the vehicle wasn't the result of panic, but of determination and injury. Carolina, it turned out, had sustained a mild concussion and bruised ribs when her van hit a ditch and slammed into a tree. The disorientation that followed clouded her judgment. Yet even in poor conditions, survivalists stressed a hard truth: staying put improves your odds. Another central theme echoed by authorities and wilderness experts was the critical role of emergency communication devices, particularly in a country as vast and hostile as Australia. Despite being well-traveled and having explored the Outback for nearly 2 years, Carolina carried no satellite phone, no APERB emergency position indicating radio beacon, and no PLB personal locator beacon. Roger Cook, the Premier of Western Australia at the time, addressed this during a press conference. If Carolina had even a basic distress beacon, the outcome could have arrived in hours, not nearly 2 weeks. We urge all travelers, backpackers, off-grid campers, hikers, to prioritize satellite communication. It's no longer optional. Several outdoor equipment retailers in WA reported a noticeable spike in PLB sales in the days following Carolina's rescue. Carolina herself, from her hospital bed, acknowledged this hard-earned wisdom in an interview with a German news outlet. "I thought I had everything covered, tools, maps, recovery boards, but I didn't know I'd need something like a beacon. I was wrong. I won't make that mistake again." Carolina's survival wasn't just a story of endurance against the elements, it was a confrontation between confidence and reality. Though she was no novice, having worked in mines, navigated remote dirt tracks, and lived in a van for months, the weather, terrain, and remoteness of the Midwest bushland still overwhelmed her. Nighttime temperatures in late June hovered just above freezing. Rain had made much of the area impassable, turning red dirt into slick mud traps. The bush was denser than she'd remembered. Despite the beauty of the Karroun Hill Nature Reserve, it lacked reliable paths and landmarks. "The Outback doesn't care how experienced you are," said Claire Tomas, a Perth-based wilderness guide interviewed by ABC News. "It has one rule: prepare for everything or prepare to suffer." Carolina admitted she underestimated just how disorienting it could be to walk day after day with no clear bearings. At times she doubled back unknowingly. At others, she followed dry creek beds that vanished into scrubland. In one instance, she reportedly sheltered inside a shallow cave for 2 nights, surviving on rainwater and sheer will. It wasn't courage, it was necessity. While medical professionals were able to rehydrate and stabilize her quickly, the deeper wounds, the emotional and mental toll, would take longer to heal. During a closed media briefing with her consent, her attending physician at Fiona Stanley Hospital described her state. She was coherent but withdrawn, quiet. Most of what she experienced out there, she hasn't verbalized. The body can heal. The mind takes longer. Survival experts noted that confusion, hallucinations, emotional numbness, and even short-term memory loss are common after prolonged isolation in life-threatening conditions. Carolina's later interviews confirmed she had only vague recollections of certain nights and stretches of walking. Her sense of time was fractured. Her sense of self had shifted. One psychologist, speaking broadly about such cases, explained, "Survivors often grapple with guilt. Why did I leave? Why didn't I do X or Y? But those thoughts come from hindsight, not reality. In the moment, every decision feels like the only one." Carolina seemed to understand this. In her final statement before leaving the hospital on July 19th, she told the media, "I know I made mistakes, but I also know I made it out. That has to mean something." In the court of public opinion, reactions to Carolina's survival were mixed, though overwhelmingly supportive. Many hailed her as brave, resourceful, and resilient. Social media posts flooded with hashtags like #CarolinaWilga, #OutbackSurvivor, and #FoundAlive. Some even called for a book or documentary, captivated by the raw intensity of her story. But others, particularly those in the emergency services and wilderness communities, offered a sobering counterbalance. They praised her survival, but pointed to it as an outlier, not a model to emulate. "She beat the odds," said a WAC's State Emergency Service officer. "But the odds are what matter." In her first and only detailed public message after her release, Carolina posted a short video to her personal Instagram account, filmed from a quiet spot in a Perth garden, her voice steady but still subdued. "Hi everyone. I've been overwhelmed with the support and kindness from people I've never met. Thank you for believing in me. I survived because people cared. Strangers searched. A woman I'd never seen gave me a hug on the side of the road and called me back to life. If you're ever in trouble out there, mentally, physically, emotionally, I hope you remember that you're not alone. Help can still come. And you're stronger than you think." The message was viewed over 1.3 million times in 2 days. And so the story of Carolina Wilga draws to a close, not as a clean triumph, not as a simple adventure gone wrong, but as a layered tale of survival and surrender. Her journey into the heart of Western Australia could have ended in silence. Instead, it became a signal flare. A call to all who roam freely across rugged landscapes: don't mistake confidence for preparedness. In a world where GPS signals can fail, tires can sink, and skies can turn, the only constant is this: respect the wild or it will humble you. What would you have done in Carolina's place? Have you ever faced danger in the wild, or overlooked safety in favor of confidence? Share your thoughts, tips, or travel rules in the comments. And if you're planning an off-grid journey soon, consider this your sign. Bring a beacon. Stay prepared, stay safe, and stay aware.